That's what I was waiting for. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a public hearing on the Esser Fund Grants. So with that, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order with a roll call, please.
Beth Bailey?
Here.
Marge Jorgensen?
Here.
John Crow?
Here.
Mary Coon?
Here.
Maria Mason?
Here.
Lisa Panzer?
Here.
Chad Freely?
Here.
Gary Spielman?
Here.
Joanne Jessup?
Here.
All right, with that, I would ask Anne Marie to please, oh, right there. You were hiding and now you're right in front of us. To present the Esser Fund Grant presentation.
And just for clarification, this is about Esser 3 specifically. So, we'll get right into it.
Is your microphone on?
That's good. I think so.
It's on?
Okay.
Oh, sorry. All right. The Safe Return to School Plan, as a requirement of ESSER 3 funding, the district had to have this. We had this in place in advance of when we needed to, so these are available out there. Mark has talked through these at the various board meetings with updates. So a little background information. So the American Rescue Plan, which was it's a third federal COVID-19 relief law. Passed in March of 2021, provides one-time funds for our district through Esser. So this is the third round of this funding, which is why it's called ESSER 3. So it provides grant money to school districts. So we are expected to receive $3,273,044 in ESSER 3 funding. So the funds may be used to support our response to the COVID-19 pandemic taking place from March 13th, 2020 through we have to use the funding by September 30, 2024. The funds are intended to help safely reopen and sustain the safe operation of schools and address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. And that intent has been the same through all three rounds of the COVID relief funding. So the funding is anticipated to be used for, we have to use a minimum of 20% of this third round of funding to implement evidence-based interventions to address learning loss. So some examples of what that could look like is summer learning or summer enrichment, extended school days, comprehensive after-school programs, or extended school year programs. So the LEAs must, which is, that's us, must ensure that the interventions respond to the student's social, emotional, and academic needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. ESSER funds must be used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19. So that can take a variety of different forms. So just some examples: preparedness response, PPE. We've used previous COVID funding for that. Whether it's masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, infrastructures to promote physical distancing, improving indoor air quality, or establishing a team to develop guidelines for infection control practices. Addressing long-term school closure. Examples of that could be additional staff to support virtual instruction, providing or delivering school meals, etc. Outreach and services for special populations, so professional development for our staff to serve English learners remotely, paying staff to teach parents of students with IEP technology and software, etc. Mental health services and supports, so additional school-based mental health staff that could include counselors, school psychs, or school social workers. Peer-to-peer suicide prevention and mental health literacy, such as Sources of Strength and Hope Squad, etc. Or education technology. So examples of that could be devices and software to provide remote instruction, improve cybersecurity, etc. So our plan for gathering input for the use of the funding So internal evaluation of data, strategic need plans, and specific school needs. And then there was a survey that went out to staff, parents and guardians, and students in December. Live input sessions from the superintendent staff advisory team, the parent advisory team, and the district administrative team. Both Board of Education committees saw a presentation very similar to this one at Teaching and Learning and Operations in January. And then tonight being the public information session, so sharing of this presentation and then allowing for community input and comment. So the survey responses, we had a total of 699 total responses. And then you can see underneath that, so our parents and guardians were approximately two-thirds of the, two-thirds of the responses. And then we had staff and students as well. So these options were put out for what people thought were priorities. They could check as many boxes as they felt were priorities. So you can see the number of responses that considered these things to be priorities and then what percentage that was of the total responders. So one of them that stood out is social emotional learning, supporting our students in some mental health issues because of COVID-19 and some of the things that have come up since then as far as mental health needs. So that was one that really stood out. And then on the kind of more physical side for prevention and mitigation, we asked about indoor air quality, increasing support services for staffing and custodians, as well as sanitation supplies and technology. So some things to consider, some of the desired items that came back in those surveys and some of the things that the district might like to do. We may have other funding options for those, whether it's some of the Title I funding that we get or other various grants that we have or could apply for, such as some mental health grants that we are currently receiving. So even though we may be moving forward with those, they might not necessarily be funded by Esser. Another thing to consider is that these are one-time funds. So as far as planning for things that would be long-term expenses, those are not necessarily viable expenses because once the grant funding runs out, the expense would either need to go away or we would need to find another way to continue funding it. The regular school or district budget needs to be analyzed to determine how this funding can support current effective practices and operations. So just to make sure that everything that we're planning to do aligns with our current plan so that we continue to move forward with the programs that we have in place. And then just keeping in mind that once an initial plan is submitted, revisions regularly occur based on updated costs, sometimes unplanned needs that we have, and then the best available funding sources. So we are required to submit a budget to DPI for this in March, but given that we have until September of 2024 to spend it, things are certainly going to change. Some of our costs that we're anticipating, or if we have other things that come up that would be priorities that we would need to fund, we do have options to revise that budget frequently. So a high-level look at what we would anticipate spending and on what things. So as it says on the top, note that expenditures may be supported by other funding sources to best meet district financial needs. So kind of looking at two different areas. One is that evidence-based intervention strategies that we are required to spend at least 20% on. So we would anticipate spending between 20 and 40% on that, which could be up to $1.31 million. So looking at positions of curriculum and instructional coaches, as well as English language learner educators. Intervention resources, so these would be materials for secondary literacy, math, and materials for English learners, as well as professional development for interventions and related instruction. And then the other category is prevention and mitigation efforts, as well as other supports. So improved air quality was one that came back as strongly supported by the survey. We already have plans for some of that in place. We've used Esser $2 on that when we did some of our rooftop unit replacements this past summer, as far as improving air quality in those using ionization. So we would continue to move forward with that. Cleaning supplies and PPE, additional nursing and custodial support for schools that came back as being supported as well. And then technology for online learning, whether it's devices or software or access to internet for our students. So depending on the evidence-based intervention strategies, we could use 60 to 80% on that second category there, which could be up to $2.65 million. So then I'll open it up to Board of Education questions and comments.
So in the areas, there were a couple of things on that list that were actually like staffing. Do you feel like you already know where the funding would come from to keep those staffing positions, or are they viewed as temporary to help with the aftermath of having been remote?
So I think some of those would be considered potentially temporary, especially in the areas of like the nursing and custodial positions, just because, you know, we've had more of that this year, just with the extra precautions around COVID and some of the needs that we've had in order to address, you know, students coming in with symptoms or, you know, things like that. And also on the cleaning side, you know, we've been trying to make sure that we're doing everything we can as far as mitigation goes. So those could potentially be, and likely would potentially be, things that could ease off and not considered long-term. Some of the other positions would likely be more permanent. And we have, Rob has identified partial funding for those partly from like Title I, Title III. So the idea would be that we would continue to support those as we felt that they were necessary in order to support our students.
So Anne Marie, as we have about 2.5 years to spend the money, do we have to update the information that we provide to DPI, or you provide them a budget once and then you just have your annual expenses against the grant that's provided?
So we have, so the way that this works is we submit a budget to DPI, and then we are required to make claims against the budget. And so with the other Esser grants, they've been required quarterly claims. So as we would potentially change what we might be using it for, we can submit budget revisions to DPI. They have to approve them before we could claim against them. So it's actually relatively frequently during the year that we have to revisit this in order to claim the money. So we have to spend it first and then get it back. So it would definitely be at least quarterly.
Okay, so is there the possibility that potentially people who are long-term staff members that we intend to have via title funding long-term, could potentially some of the Esser funding be used for a portion of their salary during the time that we have the Esser funding?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Anybody from the board?
Just one quick question. If we did not use the money, there would be no, it would go back to the state, or what would that happen?
I don't know if it would go back to the state and then eventually back to the federal
federal government?
government. But I think what you're asking sort of is if we don't use it, it's gone.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions, board? All right, and at this opportunity, we give invitation for public comment on this specific topic, the ESSER 3 funds at this time, sorry.
I have a couple questions here. Number one, following through here, you had mentioned underrepresented groups. Who does that entail, or what groups is that's underrepresented?
So that could be based on race or ethnicity, it could be based on socioeconomic status, it could be based on special ed or English language learners.
Okay, and I apologize, but everyone that has a name attached to this school building in the education system that is here to learn is a student, okay? So as far as I'm concerned, the underrepresented group should be the entire school body. And then the second one I have that I see that you had up there, can you tell me what an instructional coach is? Or define what that position actually is?
I will try.
I'll help you out if you need it.
Okay, so Rob, our teaching and learning director, would be much more suited to explain this. But as I understand it, it is a position that works with our teaching staff on instructional strategies, so basically improving their teaching. Am I close on that?
This is coaches to teach the teachers?
Yes.
Essentially.
On how to be.
Yep,
Yeah.
you did a great job. So, and our instructional coaches actually have kind of a multifaceted level of engagement with the school. So not only are they working with the teachers to help support them and their support of kids and maximize the outcomes of the craft that the teachers are using in the classroom, they also do provide some interventions. That's part of their specific time. So they're also working individually and in small groups with students that need additional support.
How many of these do we have, like at the high school level at this point?
Well, at the middle school level, we have 3 instructional coaches, and at the high school level, we have 0, right? And the elementary, we have 2. Thanks. Jesse's giving me numbers. Currently. And then depending on the instructional coach, at the elementary, they're a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife. They might be supporting multiple core instructional areas, typically literacy and math. And then at the middle school level, they're a little bit more specifically focused. One might have more expertise in math. Another one might be really specifically working with literacy, English language arts, and then the other one could be supporting or is supporting like social studies and the sciences.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Yeah, so you went through some of the strings attached to, in order to, what the money has to be spent on. What strings are attached on the front end for us to get the money in the first place? Were there strings attached? Did we have to follow certain protocols in the school to get this money?
We did not. So there were some districts who were given an initial allocation for this and then were required to provide their hours of in-person instruction in order to get additional funding. Because of the amount that we received in the first round, that second piece didn't apply to us. So this is just money based on the formula provided by the state. This is the allocation that came to us.
So it was allocated based on student population or?
I believe
district?
it was allocated in a similar formula to how we get our Title I funding, that they used essentially the same formula for that in order to do this.
Is that public, open to the public to see that?
The amounts?
I mean, how does a average taxpayer like myself find out how that all works?
As far as the formula, I'm not sure where to find that part. I know where you could see how much every district gets.
So it's going to be generally, Steve, it's going to be based on population and then need, and need is identified oftentimes with federal funding, similar to Title I, could be based on the level of socioeconomic disadvantaged students that you have in the district. But we didn't have to jump through any hoops or make any decisions relative to anything associated with the term Esser and it coming out of COVID in order to qualify for anything.
Okay. But is there a way to find that? You know, just how they dole this out?
Sure. I mean, I can find it and I can provide
Yeah,
it.
That would be great.
Yep,
And is
absolutely.
this PowerPoint, is that open to the public then? Is that going to be posted on the school board's website?
Can we post this on the website?
If the board would like us to, we'd be happy to.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that.
Okay. So there was talk, I think, about, you know, extra teaching and extra monies being available. Is there such a thing that something can be created for students that are achieving at a high level and be able to set up some kind of funds for them to teach kids and tutor? Is there something like that in the district now, that some of these funds could be used for some hardworking, poor college kid-bound person to earn extra money through these ESSER funds to help teach some of the kids that are struggling in the school for whatever subject it might be? Is there any program like that? Is there anything that could be set up? Is there flexibility within this money to do something like that? Even if it's next year?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if that's something that would qualify under this.
Just a point of clarification, are you talking about paying the students?
Yeah,
Or the,
yeah,
okay.
having certain students, if they want to stay after school, to earn extra money, to be tutors or something. Is that possible to use some of these funds to do that?
That's a good question. I would say typically, with some of these in our engagement of students, because we have students, depending on their maybe program or interest, have that opportunity to do that right now as part of like a school service opportunities. There's elements of that. Some of our service-based groups are also engaged in some types of those things, depending on what group they might be a part of. You know, sometimes in the past, NHS has been involved in those types of activities. Some of our students are also engaged in the PALS activity. So, and there's funds associated or costs associated with that, that these types of dollars perhaps could offset some of that, but we have not looked into specifically paying students, because those are usually associated with a community service, with the club that they're involved in, or they're associated with actually credit, an elective credit opportunity that they have.
Okay, and you gave some examples on things that the money could be spent on. Is there a list somewhere of things that are all options, or where do we find all the examples?
So DPI has a document of basically something similar to what I had, except even more of what would be considered acceptable expenditures on there. I know we had that in a previous presentation, so I do have the link somewhere. So if I am going to provide that other formula, I can provide that as well.
Would you, Anne Marie, just maybe it would answer his question, but if you spoke to the process of how we got our list down to where it was through the surveying and asking where everyone thought.
Oh, the
need
list,
was.
the survey list?
Yeah, just how we narrowed it down to this list up here, that we talked about it in committee some, where we ended up with these items. And it may have been Rob in his
It was
presentation.
Rob, yeah, because he basically put together that survey.
So maybe Mark can speak to that a little more.
I'm sorry, I'm working on the formula. What
Oh, sorry.
was that again?
So I said, he was asking about, where the money could be spent. I said, we came up with this list based on a lot of feedback that Rob he put into narrowing down the list and coming up with this, could you go into the survey process, how we ended up with our list and where we decided to go with this?
Right, so the survey questions essentially hit on all the different categories that referenced what we would be eligible to spend, like those categories. So if somebody took the survey, they would have seen firsthand the different elements or components. We didn't like pre-scrub the survey and remove things out. Now, in their examples, that DPI, and actually I think there's also a link on ed.gov, the government's education website, there's a listing of different categories or ideas of things that you could spend the dollars on. And there is a lot of flexibility associated with it. So not every single thing that isn't listed wouldn't necessarily not qualify. I don't know if that,
Right.
Help.
No, I think, oh, go ahead.
I was just looking for where that list is of how could those funds be spent? You know, what strings are they attaching to the funds, basically? And then you have a budget that's due in March to give to the state?
Just an initial budget.
Okay.
Yep.
And then will that be open to public comment after that, or is there any public comment welcome on that?
This is the required opportunity that we had to provide for public comment. So I wouldn't anticipate that we would have another forum for that.
We would not have another public forum prior to submitting that final budget.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Steve, I would also share that if you go to the DPI website and search for Esser 3, maybe not all your questions will be answered, but there's a boatload of information there.
Yeah, from what little I saw on it, there was $1.5 million, I think, that we were getting, but I could be wrong.
that was ESSER 2. That was
ESSER 2?
ESSER 2.
Yeah, and I'm referring to the Esser 3, and it's on the DPI website. And I haven't looked at every single page here, but there's allowed activities and costs, an overview of the application, timelines, fiscal considerations, a lot of stuff.
Was that the link that you had on the first slide?
No. The link on the first slide was to our own,
Our district had?
it was to our reopening our schools, so not tied to ESSER 3.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I think specific to your questions, though, I think Anne Marie can provide those two basic pieces of information, though. The detailed list, right, the formula, and then probably just the main website for
ESSER 3.
for ESSER 3. Okay?
Is that going to be like sent to the public, or do I have to give personal contact information, or how is that going to work to get that information?
We
Will it
can-
stay afterwards, or?
No, we'll get the information to you.
Okay.
All right?
Thanks. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, so that's almost perfect timing, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn so we
So
can
moved.
get on with the regular board meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment of the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.